Video games are places where your wishes and imaginations can come true. You can steal cars and rob banks, you can participate in a battle royale, you can roleplay as the world's most dangerous assassin and kill your targets in many hilarious and ironic ways. You can become a detective superhero to save the world. And let's not forget the most important thing. You can summon hundreds of dragons for your assistance against the evils of mankind, all of which can be done without the needs of sacrificing your sad little life. And one of the things that video games allow us to do is to immerse ourselves in a historical setting, reliving the most horrific parts of the past that could potentially be turned into a fun video game. World War II is a great example of a setting that game developers exploited in the early to mid 2000s, and the World War II games were a freaking blast back then. I myself really enjoy Battlefield 1942, it's one of my favorite World War II shooters out there. But as time went on, there were attempts being done by the progressives, or those who claim to be progressives, to change the past to suit their progressive agenda. A great example of this is Battlefield 5, making the game to be historically inauthentic, both in the aesthetics and in the single-player campaign story. This attempt of ruining the historical authenticity of the game has not only caused the game to tank significantly, as the game is being sold for very cheap just a couple of months after release, but it also dropped EA stocks to its lowest point for years now. The only good thing that Battlefield 5 has contributed is telling people about how ray tracing cards are not worth it, as they significantly tanked performance with little to no visual impact even after they patched it. With all of these demands of games being more historically authentic and accurate to the source material, the progressives, as the title suggests, do not like the relics of the past, and they're willing to destroy them and leave no trace, the same way ISIS destroy ancient artifacts in museums. You might want to talk about how all of this is for their own progressive agenda, but after reading this article from Waypoint, it's actually a lot simpler than that. It boiled me to the piss of how much mental gymnastics that they had to get through, but I found out that this entire thing is just the sad whining of someone who wants to run away from reality. How historical accuracy become a euphemism, and how it's rarely about the past. Yes, those people demanding historically accurate games are actually not demanding games to be historically accurate. They instead want video games to, actually, I don't know. I can't even think of a malicious intention being covered by this historical accuracy demand. I'm not too woke, Waypoint. Maybe you can tell me what the historical accuracy demands really mean.
When developer DICE revealed that Battlefield 5 would feature playable female soldiers, depicting them as fighting on the front lines of World War II, there was a swift and predictable backlash. Taking issue on the grounds of historical accuracy, there was a particular group of players who vehemently argued that women almost never served in regular combat on the Western Front.
Excellent start, article. Let's begin the counter-arguments. First off, yes, women almost never serve in regular combat on the Western Front in World War II. You can point to specific scenarios where they are, but that doesn't dismiss the fact that about 95% and 99% of World War II soldiers are men, which is why people feel that the game is historically inauthentic. Second, a swift and predictable backlash, as if you're writing this part on the mindset that gamers are a bunch of misogynists, so of course they would do that. And third, I love that on this particular paragraph, you cited a PC Gamer article where Patrick Soderlund actually said that people who criticize the game for being historically inauthentic are uneducated. Yes, Patrick. Tell those people who knows about World War II that they're a bunch of uneducated idiots who don't understand that this game is supposed to be gender diverse so that people can play as badass women in a World War II game. And let's not forget that marvelous quote, "You have two choices, either accept it or don't buy the game." I'm glad that you say that, Patrick, because people certainly took the second option. I'm not really surprised with this whole thing since we're dealing with ideologues who prioritize their ideologies over making money. EA is among the greediest of gaming corporations in the entire world who puts predatory practices in almost every game they touch, but to think that they're stupid enough to become woke and drain their stocks into the ground is something that completely pleases my karma porn.
Less predictable was the fact that Creative Assembly would make a point of changing Total War Rome 2, now several years into its life, to feature female generals. Again, a game studio found itself criticized by players who argued that women leading armies in the classical world isn't historically accurate.
Yes, the Total War Rome 2 debacle, which I discussed in detail in another video. I don't know why you consider that one less predictable because both games have issues with historical inaccuracies, but carry on, article.
What distinguishes these controversies in a landscape that too often feature routine harassment of women working in games and complaints about feminist perspectives making their way into
Okay, stop. The complaints of the historical accuracies of the portrayal of women in historical settings have nothing to do with the harassment of women in games. None of these things are related whatsoever. It does, however, have something to do with complaints about feminist perspectives making their way into more and more corners of gaming. That statement just confirms that ideologues are putting your feminist ideology into gaming that ruins the game's authenticity and immersion, and Battlefield 5 plainly admits that. The paragraph then continues to miss the point when talking about these two games, generalizing that both Battlefield 5 and Rome 2 are debatably ahistorical. They are, however, supposed to give an authentic experience. They don't have to be 100% historically accurate, but they still need to provide an immersive and authentic experience. Unfortunately, progressives cannot process this simple thought, so they proceed to make up lies about it.
In each case where we find appeals to historical accuracy, however, we also encounter the flaws with historical accuracy as a concept. It's a term that supposes the existence of an objectively knowable past, a view which hurts-
Whoa. Supposes the existence of an objectively knowable past. Are you implying that objectively knowable past doesn't exist? Does that mean that we could just pretend that the Holocaust didn't happen?
It's a term that supposes the existence of an objectively knowable past, a view which hurts more than it helps when it comes to understanding history.
Whoa. Wait a second. So you have this objectively knowable past, and this view supposedly hurts more than it helps when it comes to understanding history. Why? What's wrong with understanding the history that puts us to where we are today? The article then talks about Kingdom Come Deliverance, a game that is actually faithful on its historical accuracy, but then it talks about how this is less proof of the game's commitment to historical accuracy than a refusal to question its own biases when it came to the ethnic and sociological history of Europe. I'm sorry, what? What kind of bias that Kingdom Come Deliverance refuses to question? So I went on to the article cited by the paragraph to find answers. The article is titled, Kingdom Come Deliverance Quest for Historical Accuracy is a Fool's Errand. And it starts by saying that history is messy, full of gaps, and the writers weren't recording the lives of peasants like children, women, or outsiders. I'm sorry, what? Have you been missing history classes? Because the history that I read also talked about the lives of those. And then the writer said that historical researchers are just trying to fit puzzle pieces that were never really meant to fit together, and that it's educated guesswork. I mean, wow, how pretentious do you have to be to discredit the works of historical researchers as educated guesswork? I would expect these sorts of arguments from a Holocaust denier. But that's not the main point of this entire article. Oh no, essentially the writer of this article said that historians are not perfect and that they are biased just like everyone else. Writers, scientists are also biased. That doesn't mean that they can't make irrefutable objective assessments. And since the game is trying to be more historically accurate, the writer insinuates that while Kingdom Come Deliverance isn't propaganda, it is a game that looks through the lens of patriarchy.
Dun dun dun. Lightning.
The best part that immediately makes me think that the writer of this article should have a historical book being shoved down his throat is the point where he nonchalantly dismisses people's arguments, telling him to go read a book. Go read a book, they say, but they never really say which book. Herder. Writer, sorry to say this, but things really are patriarchal back then. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean that it isn't accurate. And that's the key point of this entire article. The writer doesn't like the fact that the game is historically accurate because it depicts elements that are patriarchal. It doesn't depict the stories of marginalized people, and it doesn't depict the kinds of people that the writers want, like children, rebellious women, revolutionaries, religious skeptics, religious fanatics, and certain representations of cultures. And because the writer doesn't like this, the best way to start off this article is by dismissing the hard works of historians and telling them that they are biased. I have never seen a more punchable article than this.
I'm gonna go punch whoever wrote this.
Anyway, let's get back to the original article before I do something I'll regret.
In every case, we find an appeal to history as an objective source of truth and judgment about the past. This is naive. The fact is that history, how we view it, the stories we tell about it, the things depicted as normal as opposed to aberrations, is highly political.
Alright, I think I see the misunderstanding here. Can you see it? If you can't, let me explain. History is political, therefore it makes a political statement by simply stating how things were back then. And progressives really do not like how things were back then.
The practice of history involves drawing from a pool of documentary sources to form arguments about the past. They're always based on factual evidence, but these arguments are necessarily subjective.
I'm sorry, what? The practice of history involves drawing from a pool of documentary sources to form arguments about the past? No, we're not forming arguments. History is about the knowledge of the past, and their documents are meant as a way to gain knowledge of the events of the past. What happened in the past are not formed by the biases of historians. They're formed by factual evidence. It's quite bizarre that because people criticize video games for lacking historical accuracy, progressives went on the high mile to say, oh, but history is biased and patriarchal. So what do you have to say on that? If you have to go that far to prove people wrong, there is something clearly messed up with your head.
In other words, they're profoundly colored by our politics. We're all biased in some way, shape, or form. This explains why people often come to different conclusions after examining the same sources of evidence.
So, people come to different conclusions after examining the same sources of evidence. Therefore, women populate a large portion of World War II soldiers. Therefore, women generals are common in Rome. Again, this is the sorts of arguments I would expect from a Holocaust denier. The article then cited Company of Heroes 2. I'm not too familiar with this game and why people are complaining about it, but the gist of it is this. The developer Relic said that they did the homework on the game and that they believe that the game is historically accurate. But there are some players who called the company to change the campaign because it isn't accurate. Who is right in the situation? I don't really know, but that's not really relevant here. What the writer argued for Company of Heroes 2, which is unironically defending Order 22-7 as appeal to patriotism, isn't the relevant point here. The writer used Company of Heroes 2 as an example to highlight the point that people have different interpretations of certain elements of history, and that they are both valid in some ways or the other. Can you please tell me how is viewing the meanings of Order 22-7 the same thing as, hey, let's add women in World War II? This is a completely misleading comparison. It serves nothing but to poorly justify the writer's point and say, see? Since people have different interpretations, why can't we have our own fantasized interpretation of what history is? Battlefield 5 is supposed to be an authentic experience. If you're talking about Wolfenstein, fine, go nuts. If you're talking about Valkyria Chronicles, fine, go nuts. If you're talking about any of the Warriors games, fine, go nuts. You can have your own interpretation of historical events, but you can't do that in a game where it's supposed to depict the events authentically. Having a Lamborghini is fine, but you can't put that on a 60s car museum. And then we move on to the Rome 2 controversy. The writer began by saying that there are women in command back then. Again, just because there are women in historical times who did stuff that mostly men do, doesn't mean that there are just as many as men. But the writer then said, well, since there are some female generals in the game, maybe there are more female generals that existed that we actually know about. Maybe their deeds were never documented. I swear to God, you sound more and more like a Holocaust denier.
There isn't actually much that we can say for sure about the past. History is mostly a matter of interpretation of available evidence, which itself is constantly evolving as new sources come to light. Some are better supported than others based on the available evidence, but interpretation of this variety are necessarily subjective. History is, in other words, political.
You know what, writer? Do whatever historical revisionisms you want, but one thing I can say with absolute certainty, people are never going to buy your historical revisionisms. Take notes from Battlefield 5. It has successfully brought significant damage to one of the gaming's biggest giants. The writer keeps on justifying revising history to their liking, saying that it's just seeing the past from a new perspective. You just need to be open about it. Well, since you spent most of the article denying the harsh realities of history, the only thing that players are going to be opening is the door to the helicopters.
There are also points where a more accurate depiction of a single aspect of history ends up fueling a legacy of erasure and indifference. If the choice is between games in which women do not exist because historically they were largely excluded from playing an active role in a setting, and a game which embraces anachronism in order to include them, which is more important? Which depiction gets history right?
Writer, if you want a setting where women are common, make them. Don't take history and change it to however you want.
Developers aren't directly accountable for players for their political perspectives. They're actually free to frame history however they like. Game makers have been doing this for as long as there have been games.
How can you say this with a straight face when you just criticize Kingdom Come Deliverance for doing this very thing that you just talked about? You defended Battlefield 5, Actually, you didn't defend Battlefield 5, you just used other games as a red herring. You defended Rome 2 and Company of Heroes 2 with this specific reason, but you didn't do it for Kingdom Come Deliverance because you disagreed with the political perspective of the developer. Great job, writer. Great job. But the kicker of this entire thing is the final paragraph. This final paragraph is the one that turns this article from boiling rage into pathetic sadness.
With its detailed depictions of the past, Assassin's Creed is bound to come up in almost any discussion about historical accuracy in games. The developer behind the franchise, Ubisoft, creates incredibly realistic environments. Walk around Athens in Assassin's Creed Odyssey and you'll soon see what I mean. The characters aren't quite as convincing though. Cassandra, for example, seems to reflect remarkably contemporary cultural values. Women may have been relatively empowered in Sparta, but there's plenty of evidence to suggest that they were almost completely disenfranchised in every other parts of ancient Greece. Could we call Cassandra historically accurate? That kind of question really misses the point. Cassandra is a reflection of what Ubisoft wants the world to be, not the way it was.
And that, my friend, is the crux of the entire argument. All of this dismissal of history and its problematic events have one main purpose. And that purpose is for the progressives to make a world that they wanted. A world that feels comfortable for them. A world that is free from patriarchal beliefs. A world that is free from problematic historical depictions that the progressives don't like. These people are going to do whatever it takes to make that world possible. And that includes destroying the foundations of history and revising it to their interpretations so that they can see them through their ideological lens, just like a terrorist would. Now, all of this makes sense. This article is written by someone who is running away from the harshness of reality, running away from the truth of the matter, and attempting to justify their actions by telling people about how the world should change to their wills, rather than them confronting to the world around them. I'm not even mad right now. This is one of the saddest articles that I've ever read. It's like listening to the whinings of Shinji Ikari.
You're running away from the truth because it's ugly?
Why not? What's wrong with running away from reality if it sucks?